Welcome to Development and Socialization. I want to take a moment to say how serendipitous, like this moment of serendipity in life. This week, I'm lecturing to you about development and socialization, and this week also is the beginning of a developmental psychology class I'm teaching. So, what you spend 1 week of lecture on, I'm about to spend an entire semester on the development and socialization of humans and the way we think. So it's so cool. Let's see if I can boil an entire semester down into one lecture, picking out the most important parts. But first, the most important part I'd like to pick out is that a moment in history was made. Issa Rae is the first person in history to receive the key to the city of Inglewood. Wasn't I just talking about her 2 lectures ago? Wow. Talk about development, how she has developed from that Tweet It into Existence campaign in 2010, I believe it was. So here we are over a decade later, and she has become a more successful version of herself. She has developed. And certainly she couldn't have done it without the social relationships in her life. See how I brought that back to lecture? Okay. Development and enculturation. I would like to encourage you. Well, first of all, check out this art. Culture is where we are from. What? Okay, anyway. I would like to begin by encouraging you to identify with the upcoming theoretical perspectives through the lens of self. Many of us will have the experiences and perspectives that we do simply because that's just the way it is. But this chapter and this lecture presents an opportunity to explore the why of how we have come about our traditions, values, habits, and ideas that we have about ourselves and others. So a guiding principle on the path to valuing diversity of thought, experiences, and heritage is to first ask ourselves, self-awareness moment, what is my cultural identity? Studying enculturation is different than an introductory psychology or sociology course. We've taken a look at what it means to study culture. When I say culture, key points to remember is that culture is learned, and culture is a psychological phenomenon. Let's contrast the concept of culture with socialization. Socialization, on the other hand, is the general process of acquiring what's normal and what's valued in our social world. And enculturation is the uniquely human form of learning that is taught by one generation to another. While socialization refers to the general process of acquiring culture, enculturation, on the other hand, is the process of being completely immersed in a specific culture. So many of you might answer the question, what is my culture? Through a racial category, an ethnic category, or perhaps a religious affiliation. Everyone has culture. The answer to this question, what is my culture, is complex, and ideally will be at the back of your mind, each and every one of your minds, as we progress through the course. Enculturation is meant to benefit the child, specifically to adapt in a world full of threats and dangers, and also meant to benefit the child for health and success. It's meant to shape our development in subtle and not so subtle ways, and it's also meant to influence our accepted behavior. There is research to support that the human brain shares key universal aspects at birth. Each human has a window of development. Typically, it's in early childhood, where neurological wiring or brain cell wiring is acquired smoother and faster than at any other point in time. Most of us can name windows of development for language and motor movement, like how old are we when we learn to speak? How old are we when we learn to combining movements to crawl and then walk? But research by, Kitayama and Uskul, 2011, along with others, have found evidence to support that this window for pathway wiring also occurs for enculturation. So we have this sensitive period of development early in life where our brain is its most plastic, meaning that if we are taking piano lessons at age 4, for example, then the brain is going to start piecing that information from a very, very early age. And because the brain can acquire information smoother and faster than at any other point in this development, it's sensitive right now, then it can learn things faster. And what it doesn't make use of, it kind of gets rid of. So only things that are being used and put to the test are really strengthening and growing. Like, they're plastic, they're movable and flexible, they're not rigid yet. So brain functioning is then shaped by cultural processes to form the human mind, what we call mind. Cultural neuroscience studies how culture, mind, and the brain interact. So cultural neuroscience says we can't study the brain unless we're studying culture. A possible question to ask, let's think about this. Would it be easier for a child, teenager, or adult to migrate to a new country for permanent residence? And why? In which stage of development would adapting to the new customs, language, and ideals be easier? Child, teenager, adult. So that's a good question to think about. Enculturation. Culture is ingrained, according to the researchers I mentioned earlier. When I say a sensitive period of development, I mean neurons that fire together become wired together. This is also, you can think of it as use it or lose it. So it's so much easier to learn a new language, a foreign language, or to learn a foreign instrument in a sensitive development period in childhood because the neurons are firing together. It's harder to learn to play the piano later on in life because the neurons are not firing together as rapidly as they did in early childhood. However, that does not mean it's impossible. It only means that it's not as easy and it doesn't come without effort. Which is why if you're going to teach a child something new, it'll probably seem more effortless in childhood than an effortful in adulthood. There are 2 types of brain plasticity. Neuroplasticity, also known as brain plasticity, that's the brain's ability to change and adapt. We can think of plasticity as happening at the structural level, where experiences or memories themselves change a brain's physical structure. Like I said, neurons that fire together, structurally wire together. And then there's also functional plasticity, where brain functions move from a damaged area to an undamaged area. That's the function. Okay. I'd like to ask you, what are some decisions and choices that parents make in raising kids that different from household to household? Is there a right way to discipline a child? Is breastfeeding a newborn better than bottle feeding? And where should kids sleep? I invite you to struggle with this a little bit and not only think about these questions, but why you feel that way. We know from research that caretakers or parents serve as the number one enculturation agent for a child in any given society. And those questions that I asked you in the beginning are some different choices that parents make in childcare that definitely influence our upbringing. Research suggests that child discipline, sleeping arrangements, eating habits, and education are 4 main areas that impact development in significantly different ways across cultures. This is important to note since different parent choices and behaviors can lead to ethnocentric comparisons. Stephen Hine points out that these differences are often moralized as right versus wrong choices rather than simply different. He refers to this as the moralization of parenting. And I know this is a big duh, but it's worth pointing out and teasing apart so that we can study it and analyze it. Different groups have unique parenting habits and beliefs. It's important to remember that differences in caretaker choices reflect differences in goals, values, resources, and experiences. I didn't say better, I said different. And this chapter in our course examines the enculturation process, both the ones that are universal and the ones that are culture specific, in 4 areas of child development. Any course a student takes in lifespan or child development could be taught through the lens of enculturation. So for the purpose of this course, there are 4 major models represented to illustrate the themes: temperament, attachment, parenting styles, and cognitive development. Let's see. Thomas and Chess in 91 believe that there are 3 basic categories of temperament that we have seen from infancy. There's the biological basis that forms our later personality. There are the traits that shape how reactive we are and how we're able to self-regulate or monitor what's going on inside. And also the interaction between the child's traits and the environment that impact later functioning. So we got the nature and the nurture, what you're born with and what you're born into. The goodness of fit is a concept that could extend beyond the parent-child dynamic. Thank goodness. This is the match between a child's temperament and the caretaker's style of parental care. I could ask you to think of other areas in which goodness of fit may be important. Hint, hint, what about the teacher-student relationship? Or even the boss-employee relationship, the boss-employee fit. It is important to note that a slow to warm or difficult child is not necessarily a harder child to raise. There's not anything wrong with the child. However, sensory sensitivities and unique needs can be interpreted by a caretaker as negative, which will impact their parenting interactions. How easy or difficult or slow to warm up is this child? So we have these traits are separate from aspects of development. These traits are not an issue of motivation, not of cognitive ability, and not of their potential. So we have easy temperament. A child adapts well, generally cheerful. About 40% of babies are easy. About 15% are slow to warm up. They adapt, but they do it more slowly, and they have less intense emotional reactions. And the smallest amount, the 10% of babies, are difficult. Adapting takes longer. They have intense emotional reactions. So you might think of it through the lens of what comes first, the chicken or the egg, the temperament or the child. The question might be, is the child difficult first, or are there sensitive and slow to adapt behaviors interpreted as difficult that lead the child to acting difficult? Questions we'll never know. A child's temperament impacts their experiences of their self. Temperament impacts social comparison, so how well you adapt, how generally cheerful and intense your emotional reactions are, affect your social comparison and how others react to you, to them. Bornstein writes, parents perceive and respond to or about their children through a lens of self. So this lens of temperament. And certainly my temperament will affect how I interact with a child and their temperament. And that would be a goodness of fit, depending on how well we do fit. Built off of early attachment work by John Bowlby, John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth ask, how does the child balance an emotional need with the natural desire to explore or the natural desire to be independent? Mary Ainsworth developed the strange situation experiment to analyze the maternal bond with a child. This has gone into detail in our chapter reading. And let's see, here's the question, and the blueprint question. Can the early bonds formed in infancy become a brain blueprint for later relationships? You might be thinking, what are my attachments to the people in my life? What are my attachment patterns to the people I have dated in my life? Can I examine my attachment to a romantic partner through the lens of my attachment to my caretaker, to my first parental partner? An attachment is a deep and enduring emotional bond. Emotional bond that connects one person to another across time and space. The purpose of the strange situation study was not to make the child upset and not to make them cry. It is to create a small amount of stress to gauge their reaction during the reunion. Does the child seek out the caretaker, and does the caretaker's comfort help? Remember that the caretaker leaving the room in this study is what caused the stress. So the caretaker's return should be the problem to the solution. How do we form attachments to people? Mary Ainsworth's perspective is different from the attachment parenting work of Dr. Spock. The work of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth looks to stress that the child who is secure in their knowledge of a parent base that meets their emotional needs will feel more curious, more independent, and more capable of exploring the world. You may want to think about how the westernized value of independence in U.S. culture may lead parents to overemphasize independence at too young an age and to have it backfire. For example, give me an example, Dr. Griffin. An example is not letting a child have a stuffed toy or blanket at 12 months because I, as the parent, intend for the child to be a strong, independent young adult. That might not be developmentally appropriate for a 12-month-old. The early work of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth is written to analyze the connection between a child and their mother. That was indicative of the times where many children were predominantly raised in households with a female caretaker. It is important to point out that follow-up research finds no measurable difference between the quality of attachment patterns and gender or biological connection. What is important is the child-caretaker connection, not the gender or biological relationship of the caretaker. So from the strange situation study and placing a child under stress, finding out if the child reacted to the parent leaving, there are 3 identified patterns of attachment. The first is secure, and the second and third both stem from insecure attachment, which are further divided into anxious ambivalent and anxious avoidant. Pardon me. The secure babies are infants who know that their caregiver is dependable and create a secure base for the child, like a home base. The insecure babies means that they have a lack of secure base, which leads to, or can lead to, poor self-esteem, anxiety, and difficulty with social connections later in life. There are 3 main styles of attachment as described by Ainsworth's work. The 4th style, because of course we're always learning and building off of ourselves, the 4th style of disorganized attachment that was later added to identify and include behavioral patterns observed in cases of severe abuse and neglect. So the secure attachment style means that the parent is responsive to the needs, and therefore being more responsive to the needs of the child allows the child to explore more freely. The child is comforted during the reunion stage, when the parent comes back into the room of the study. An ambivalent style of attachment means that the child lacks initiative even with the parent present. They are highly stressed babies during the absence of the parent, and they are passive and not comforted when the parent comes back into the room for the reunion. Avoidant means that the child generally ignores the caregiver and practices little distress. They are disinterested when the parent comes back to be their base. Attachment theory, let's talk about it, is based largely on westernized ideals of caretaking. There is solid research to support that early bonds do shape later development and relationships across cultures. So it's not how you start, it's how you finish. Keller finds that context is a crucial factor in determining the style that is most adaptive across cultures, which means that the Western ideal of secure may or may not be a standard definition across all cultures. Shocker. Similar to the work of temperament and the goodness of fit, the principles of Diana Baumrinn's work can be discussed outside the parent-child dynamic. She proposed that the potential of a child depends on the nature of their environment. She focused her study on the influence of parenting behaviors and parents' confidence to identify 3 patterns in parenting styles along the dimensions of demandingness and responsiveness. And of course, a 4th category was later added. So let's look at these in more detail. Parenting styles. Authoritarian. Do as I say, not as I do. This is the high demand, lack of warmth parenting style with a one-sided communication. Authoritarian parents pay more attention to a child when correcting them, when they're correcting their behavior. They have strict rules and they expect blind obedience. Authoritarian, with an authority figure, is associated with lower self-confidence, lower self-esteem, more delinquency, more anxiety, and more depression. Permissive parenting style, the it's not worth it. This style is full of low demand on the child and it's overly responsive. Maybe you think of this as coddling. Discipline is inconsistent, and parents give in because it's seen as more practical than upsetting the child. There's often a lack of clear structure with the barter system. Do this and I'll give you that. It overlooks disrespectful behaviors and non-compliant behaviors. Growing up, this parenting style is associated with egocentrism, poor social behavior, and lack of impulse control. Really makes you think about the parenting styles of the partners we choose. Worth a conversation with your partner or future partner. Authoritative parenting styles discipline the behavior, not the feelings. This is a parenting style that is high on demands and high on warmth. It is full of responsive interaction. Expectations are clear and consistent. Parents may label and validate emotions while maintaining clear boundaries. This parent demonstrates affection and attention more so than only correcting. It is associated with clear correlations with healthier overall physical and psychological development. Wow. Physical development can happen based off of parenting styles. Authoritative parenting maintains the highest correlation with healthy children after 25 years of study. Authoritative, not authoritarian, not this one, not authoritarianism, but authoritative parenting maintains the highest correlation with healthy children after 25 years of study. Research by Bornstein in 2012 found that aspects of development, especially social achievement, is not always linked to authoritative parenting. For example, in some African American and Asian American communities, children perform better academically in households with authoritarian parenting styles, especially when reporting strong peer support. Additionally, some European cultures have shown to raise physically and psychologically healthy children in both indulgent and authoritative households. Points to consider. Research shows that some diverse ethnic and socioeconomic status groups can benefit from authoritarian or permissive behaviors, especially with peer support. So again, there is no one-size-fits-all, because many children are impacted by different parent styles in one household. And parenting styles may differ for many reasons. A couple of them are socioeconomic status, the parent history with being parented, of course, practicing what was handed down to us, cultural heritage, our personality, and definitely our level of education once or if we ever become parents. Talking about people, one of my favorite people, Jean Piaget. Piaget is one of the first to construct a stage theory analysis of child's intellectual development, where children are not just mini adults, but they learn to construct images of the world around us in stages. And let's see, the concept of readiness in cognitive adaptation. Okay, so what stage does a child need to be at to adapt to new problem-solving skills? It's not like you learn to put a puzzle together when you're 4, and then as soon as you hit 5, you know your shapes and colors. And as soon as you hit 6, you know that tall and skinny, a glass full of water in a tall and skinny glass might hold the same amount of liquid as a short and fat glass. These don't happen at set ages. They happen at stages in our mental cognitive development. We go through stages comparing that knowledge to the new information the world gives us to identify discrepancies. Here's an example of schemes of learning. So first, a child is banging its favorite toy. Banging is a favorite scheme used by babies to explore the world. Then another phase of learning is assimilation. This occurs when they incorporate new objects into the scheme. Accommodation occurs when a new object does not fit into the existing scheme, and children need to create a new scheme to learn what just happened, because that didn't go the way that it has always gone in my whole 3 years of existence. I've never seen that before. That means I got to think about this a different way now. So those are the three terms that Piaget gave us. There are also 4 stages of cognitive development that Piaget gave us, and here they are described. The sensory motor is basically the intelligence level that you can expect a 0 to 2-year-old to perform. 0 to 2-year-olds cannot perform logical reasoning. Rather, they interact in the environment with their senses. You know, babies are always putting stuff in their mouth and their nose. That's because they are expected to understand the world, not using logic, but by using their senses. Then from 2 to about 6 or 7, babies start to become more aware of symbols, like learning a language. Then from 6 to 7, about to 11 or 12, then they start to practice reasoning with logic. And then finally, about 11 to 12 to hopefully lifetime in adulthood, individuals can think logically about things in front of them or abstract ideas, and they can actually practice and advance their reasoning. That's right, you tell them, Naz. Here's a cool example that's used through all 4 stages. Sensory motor stage, all a baby can do is drink the water and spill it and see what happens, play around with the water. Pre-operational stage 2 to 4, or 2 to 7 rather, they're starting to conceptualize the symbol of water. Concrete operational stage, that's when they're starting to see abstract reasoning, short, fat glass, tall, skinny glass. Even though they don't look the same to my eyes, they symbolically and physically, using the laws of physics, they hold the same amount of water. And then when we get older, we start to think, abstract reasoning. Is the glass half empty? Is the glass half full? Cultural lens moment. Cross-cultural considerations. We cannot assume that the development of cognition is universal across all groups. Because Piaget, as great as he was, and as Swiss as he was, his theory is rooted in a westernized paradigm. Not all individuals attain formal operational thought. Not all individuals get to this final formal operational stage of reasoning, logical reasoning, advanced abstract reasoning. And not all societies value that last stage of reasoning as ideal. Let's contrast the work of Lev Vygotsky to provide a useful framework for understanding Piaget. So Lev Vygotsky further developed Piaget's theory of children and said, well, children aren't necessarily lone and autonomous learners. They actually learn in the context of other learners or other teachers even. With a strong emphasis on the role of culture and language in cognitive development, Vygotsky's work highlights the role of the teacher in child cognitive development and stresses the importance of a zone of proximal development. The zone of proximal development, or ZPD, means that there's a presence of someone with the knowledge and the skills to guide the learner. There are supportive activities or scaffolds that provide the learner by the expert to help guide the learner from not knowing to knowing something. And then, of course, there's social interactions that allow the learner to work on their skills. So these are the three aspects of the ZPD. Starting off with, here's what I can do. I can't do everything. Here's what I can do. And with a little bit of help, someone can get me from what I can do to what I used to not be able to do. So I have like what I can do here, what I can't do here. Someone needs to help me expand. It's a very simple way of breaking down this theory that totally shaped the field that we are in. I want you to notice the words that I've colored the same. Lev Vygotsky's big emphasis is on someone, providing, and interacting. So Piaget gave us new information on how children develop cognitively, but some limitations of how he thought were based on the child being alone in their learning. And Lev Vygotsky said, yeah, that's great, but humans are relational beings. We don't develop in isolation. Remember that first slide I showed you of the astronaut? We're not all alone learners. We don't exist in isolation. We are relational beings, especially when we're learning. So, let's see. Yes. The ZPD is the distance between what a learner is capable of doing unsupported and what they can do when they are supported. The task a learner cannot accomplish with assistance, the task a learner can accomplish with assistance, and the task a learner can accomplish without assistance. The success of this learning process involves the presence of someone else. That someone else needs to provide a scaffold activity, and they need to interact with the learner. Okay. There are other important enculturating agents in the life of a child. Bronfenbrenner gave us a whole ecological systems theory, and I really like that he did because it allows us to give us a framework of thinking, why do certain things happen the way they do when they do? Because we don't exist in isolation. In fact, we exist within these like nest eggs. So the first nest egg is the microsystem. That's the individual. That's the child, the microsystem. Then the mesosystem is the next nest egg. Their interactions with their parents, their daycare, peers, schoolmates, family, doctor's office visits, immediate people in their environment. And then there's people in their environment that they don't necessarily interact with, but that still influences the child. The neighbors, the legal services, community and welfare services, mass media. We're not interacting with the reporters of mass media, but the stories that they report are influencing us. And then finally, the macro system, which is the broadest system of the country and the laws that we live in, social class. So now we can start to think about education as not only, well, it's the child's fault if they're not learning. There's actually a couple of different systems, and we forgot about the time of all of these systems, which is the chrono system, the changes in a person or environment over time, because all of these levels change given the time and space. Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory views child development as a complex system of relationships affected by multiple levels of the surrounding environment, again, from immediate settings in the mesosystem of family and school to the broadest macro system, cultural values, laws, and customs. The ecological systems theory provides a holistic approach which is inclusive of all the systems that children and their family are involved in. This more accurately reflects the dynamic relationship and nature of family relationships. So, for example, concrete example, let's say there's a Black child who's having problem behavior at school. On the microsystem level, I would say, did they eat today? Mesosystem, did their parents get into a fight on the way to school today? Exosystem, did they see a violent event on the mass media today? Macrosystem, are there Black Lives Matter protests against police brutality going on in today's country's climate? Because these are all influences or enculturating agents on any given child in any given day. And of course to you, not only the child. Erik Erikson, a true developmental psychologist who looked at humans from infancy to late adulthood and death. Erik Erikson looked at infancy, early childhood, preschool, school age, adolescent, young adult, middle adult, and maturity, late adulthood, as well as how we process death, dying, and grieving. And in each of these ages, these age ranges or stages, he broke each range down by physical, cognitive, emotional, and social. So it's not like from 0 to 10 years old, we grow physically. And then from 10 to 20, we start developing cognitive skills. We learn how to read and write. And then from 20 to 30, then we develop social skills. No, they're all happening at once. And because there's so much complexity happening, Erikson took these 4 major categories and said, I think I can divide everything that's going on with humans at any point in their life into one of these 4 categories. Knowing, of course, that these 4 categories fit into these nest eggs. Development in the real world is complex, and as you have seen, it is influenced by many factors. Experiencing different types of caregiving and then going on to raise our own children is a key reason why different cultures are who they are. Different parenting choices are not necessarily good or bad. I never said that. Neither did cultural psychologist Stephen Hine, who cautions against moralizing parent choices because this can lead to ethnocentric perceptions of parent behavior. Parents from all cultures mainly strive to raise healthy, happy, contributing members of society. How would you go about raising a child? What are 3 things you would prioritize and value above all else? What steps would you take to achieve that goal? I invite you to think about and reflect on the priorities of your caretakers. Many young adults grow up with an opinion of the parent choices they will either recreate or avoid at all costs. What did your parents do and not do that you will hold on to or avoid? Can you begin to reflect and name what your parents must have valued or prioritized in order to make the choices they did in raising the child? You. As a review, the process of enculturation is complex. It works in both universal and culturally specific ways. Developmental factors of goodness of fit, attachment, parenting styles, and cognition work to shape a child's physical and psychological health in culturally diverse ways, in ways that we can see and not see. Beware of ethnocentric reactions to parent choices and behaviors before you judge that child at the supermarket's behavior. Think about what is ideal in some contexts. That may not be as ideal as in other contexts. Up next is mental and physical health, divided into 2 different lectures. I'll see you there.